George. This week, we've had some rare good news on the COVID front. Finally, the FDA gave full permanent approval to the Pfizer vaccine, which thankfully removes one of the main excuses that have been out there for the vaccine hesitant and the vaccine resistant to actually go out there and get vaccinated. But this is once again raises a lot of questions that many people have had on the FDA process and what comes next. Thankfully, once again, joining us to hash out some of these issues is my colleague, Mary Duenwald, who we were just talking about is like celebrating her 10th anniversary at Bloomberg, where she has been concentrating most of the time on issues of medicine and science. So, Mary, congratulations for your 10 years and welcome back to Editorial Board Conversations.
Thank you.
Great. So the main question is, I guess we can start off. As I said, it's good news that the FDA has given final approval on the Pfizer vaccine. What comes next? When can we expect Moderna and Johnson vaccine to get approval? And while we're talking about that, can you give us a sense of how this approval process happens? Because it's very confusing, I think, for many people.
Yeah, it is confusing, and we don't have complete information. The latest I've read is that the Moderna vaccine that has also applied for full approval. Their approval should come in the next several weeks. We don't know anything more specific than that. Johnson & Johnson has not yet applied for full approval. And once it does, it turns out it takes a few months, even in this speeded up process. In normal, when they're trying to go fast on it, normally it usually takes 8 months to get full approval. But everything has gone a lot faster with the COVID vaccines. And that is partly why the process has worked out the way it has, both here and in Europe and in Britain. Emergency use, or what they call in Europe conditional use, was granted first. What you do when you have a drug is there's a regulatory agency in the United States, it's the FDA, and they need to make sure that the drug works and is safe and is manufactured well enough that everybody knows that every dose they get is going to be the right medicine that works. So we were in a hurry to get the COVID vaccines. So the FDA allowed just 2 months of data from clinical trials. That's phase 3 trials. You take thousands of people, give half of them the drug and half of them don't get the drug, and you compare what happens to the two groups. You're looking for side effects, any kind of signs for how well it works. Normally, the FDA wants 6 months of trial data. They gave emergency approval after 2 months of trial data. And then after those clinical trials continued on, and after they were through 6 months, then Pfizer applied for full approval. Same with Moderna.
Well, I guess for the average person, wouldn't they logically ask this question? So yes, we can understand we understand the emergency approval. If you now look, though, I mean, Pfizer, we actually have this window of close to 8 months, or actually more than 8 months, where the Pfizer shots have been in operation. Wasn't that length of time sort of enough to determine? Millions have gotten the shot, and the side effects. I mean, the serious side effects have been almost minimal. So somebody has to ask, did it really take this long to get that permanent approval?
I mean, that's a good and understandable question, but they're not looking at the way the vaccines operate in the real world, because in the real world, outside of clinical trials, the very detailed data is not being generated. And it's important to look. I mean, when Pfizer, when the FDA looked at the full approval application, it's hundreds and thousands of pages of data that come from all the measurements that are done within a clinical trial. And it's a good thing that they waited, because there were things that came out in those clinical trials after the 2-month period, including the heart inflammation that showed up in adolescents and young adults. So that it's a more specific, more detailed process, and it also involves, as I said, paying attention to the manufacturing of the drug.
Uh, is there still you follow this, and you follow this on a day-to-day basis, and you've been following these kind of stories for years now. Again, for the average person at home, could government agencies do better in terms of transparency, in terms of explaining what's going on with the process? So the genuinely skeptical can have their fears allayed, and those who actually prey on that skepticism to try and sow doubt into the entire process.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely people on both sides of that equation. And I definitely think that the FDA could be more transparent about everything it does. I just told you, we think it will be several weeks before Moderna gets approval. We don't know when approval, even emergency use approval, will be granted for the vaccines to be used in kids under the age of 12. It could be months. It would be nice, now that we're all so much more interested in this very specific drug, these very specific vaccines, if the FDA could go outside its normal traditions of just operating without telling the public much about what it's doing, and let us know the timeline, what it's going to take to get those drugs approved, the vaccines approved for kids under 12, how long it's going to take. Just keep us up to date. This is different than other things they've worked on before, and more public coming clear about what's happening would be very helpful.
Is there anything that, broadly speaking, the federal scientific agency, scientific authorities, our scientific authorities, our health authorities can do to better educate the public? It seems that we've had so many conflicting advisories and recommendations that, as we said in a recent editorial, the public is baffled on what's going on here, and who can blame them?
Well, I would argue that the public is baffled by COVID-19, because it's, it isn't so much the FDA, which has been pretty mum about everything, but the CDC. Their job is to look at the disease that's happening right now, pay attention to how it's progressing through the population, and what efforts are best taken to try to prevent its spread. A few months ago, they came out and said that their guidance on wearing masks, they could let go of it, because, and that was true at the time, we were in pretty good shape. But then the Delta variant came along, and it was not only transmitting at unpredicted speed, but their evidence came along. This is the kind of evidence that the CDC pays attention to, that people who were vaccinated could be infected by COVID, the Delta variant of COVID-19. That we already knew, but what was new was that it seemed that vaccinated people who were infected could spread the virus. So that meant, okay, no, masks are helpful again. That's what changed. It wasn't the CDC just, blithely changing its advice to confuse people. The other problem that plays into all of this, of course, is all the other sources of information that people um, use for COVID-19 information. So much of it is a muddle. It's very difficult for the CDC to. I wish they would have daily press conferences and be this place that just constantly was the source of information for Americans on um, COVID 19. There probably are other ways they could be maybe a little clearer or sort of assert their expertise more. They don't have authority. They give us guidance. They don't give us mandates. But people
Oh,
aren't listening just to the CDC.
no, exactly. Unfortunately, as we found out, they want to listen to their friends on Facebook more than they do with the CDC. But let's put that issue aside for a moment. I mean, I think you implicitly gave a stronger defense of CDC messaging than I think a lot of people in the media have given. Whereas you sound a little bit more skeptical or maybe critical of what's been coming out of the FDA. I mean, these are in a sense the two leading federal authorities, trying to guide us through COVID. And how would you assess how each is done, relatively speaking?
Well, you see how they have two different jobs. The CDC is to help the public and states and schools and hospitals and everybody know the best known advice on dealing with this disease that's rampant in the country right now. So their job is a public information job. And I think where arguments happen here is how well are they doing it? I would say they're at least doing the right thing by following the data and not giving us advice that isn't based on their best knowledge of the data. The FDA's job is not a public information one. Their job is to regulate drugs and that is to make sure that they're safe and effective and licensed to be sold in the United States because they are safe and effective. They're traditionally not very public about what they're doing. They just do their job, and it takes a long time, and it's kind of happens in a black box as far as the public is concerned. And that's all been fine for drugs, a lot of different drugs that we just wait for them to go through the pipeline and don't really think about them. This is different. I think they need a more of a public facing component now, just to help with the anxiety that everyone feels because they don't have enough information about what's coming and when.
And we do know, or at least I guess the media, of which obviously we are a part. We do know that the public has been listening, and one of the major concerns that they have raised about the vaccines is that it didn't have permanent FDA approval. In the last week or so, I think President Biden said that we've had like maybe 3 days in a row where a million people have gotten at least one shot. Do you think that the FDA's approval of Pfizer is going to enhance that pickup and help us target a new milestone?
I mean, I hope so. I'd be a little bit surprised because the people who are hesitant to get a vaccine, some of them have mentioned this emergency use authorization versus full approval, but the people who have done the polling on that question have acknowledged that most of them don't really know, most of the respondents don't really know the difference. And so the idea that full approval will suddenly cause them to trust the government and trust in these vaccines, I'll be surprised. But it is being used, full approval is being used by a lot of institutions, hospitals, companies, schools, the military, to lay down their vaccine mandates. And that, I think, should make a difference. In fact, vaccine mandates, many people say that the reason the numbers have gone back up to 1 million a day, they may be a big part of that.
As we finish up here, it's the end of August, and obviously, many kids have already come back to school. Many more are going to be going back in September. Do you have any kind of words of advice for parents who are waiting for when there might be approval for under 12 to get vaccines, and also guidance on mask mandates and other related issues?
I mean, they're in the tough position, the parents of kids under 12, because they can't get vaccines. It's a mistake to try to get vaccines for them. The studies are not done yet. It's not clear whether they're safe. And it's likely that when vaccines are approved for kids under 12, it'll be a smaller dose. It won't be, the same dose that older people get. So, but you're stuck with an unvaccinated person who's going out into a public situation where there is masks do, it's like with the rest of us before the vaccines came along. Masks do help prevent the spread of COVID-19. I'd be at least open-minded about masks, as some school districts are not right now. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning in which the writer recommended that parents be careful about how many different extracurricular activities they have kids join in. Now, maybe just limit to the things they like the most. It's not there is no perfect way to approach this, but the main idea is just to try to be as careful as you can.
That's something we can all learn to live by. Mary Duenwald, my esteemed colleague, once again, congratulations! 10 years at Bloomberg Opinion, and so we'll wrap it up there. Once again, thank you all for looking in, and I'm Robert George, and we'll see you next time on Bloomberg Opinion Editorial Board.